Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ask Kati Anything. I'm your host, licensed marriage and family therapist, Kati Morton. I'm so glad that you're here. In today's episode, I am going to offer ways that we can care a little bit less about what other people think of us. Then I'm also going to talk about ways we can stop emotional eating and how we can use somatic experiencing and somatic releases to help us better manage our stress and anxiety. And then I'm going to try to motivate you to keep going when it feels like nothing's working and everything's against us. I'm also going to talk about how we can better deal with having an invisible illness and how to get unstuck in our life. Now, if you are looking to get your questions answered or want more connection with our community, you can go over to YouTube. youtube.com/Kati Morton/join. You can go over to my YouTube page and join my YouTube memberships. I have live streams 4 times a month over there. At the top tier, you not only get journal prompts every Tuesday and Friday, you also get 2 30-minute live streams every month, as well as 2 60-minute live streams every month. So it's a great way to connect. I also have my Patreon page. You can go to patreon.com/Kati Morton. I have live streams there every month as well, and you can get your questions answered at the $20 tier and above. Okay, without further ado, let's jump into today's questions. Question number 1 says, "Hi, Kati. How can I learn to care a little less about what others think of me? Specifically about being liked by everyone. It's exhausting. I'm obsessed with making sure that everyone thinks I'm a nice person or a good person, and the thought of someone being mad at me is really distressing. Worse, I notice that if I even think someone doesn't like me, which might not even be true, I double stress and try extra hard to win them over. I'm constantly concerned with the little things, like making sure my smile was big enough when I said good morning, or rereading an email several times just to make sure that I was friendly enough, etc. I realize it's not realistic for everyone to like me, but it's hard to let it go, LOL. I'm a longtime listener, so I know many of the skills and advice may be transferable here, but I don't remember a question about likability being asked specifically. So I'm tossing it in the mix. Thank you so much for all that you do. Your podcast is awesome." I'm so glad. Now, there was another one. I'm just going to read this because we're going to go through it and they're very closely related. It says, "I feel the same way. I am so concerned with making sure I am a good or nice person that I often end up thinking back to any conversation that I've had that day and see if there's anything that could have been misinterpreted and come out as mean, even if I hadn't intended it that way. I just feel so awful, and I feel like I have to go back and apologize. Sometimes it happens immediately after a conversation, especially when I've had to ask someone to give me some space, and then I feel like it might have been too harsh or something, even though I said it in a very gentle way. And then I can't even feel comfortable with the space that they gave me because I feel like a horrible person the whole time. If I ever think I might not be a good or nice person because of something I've said or done, I just feel so awful. Where does this come from, and what can be done to alleviate this feeling?" These are great questions. How can we care a little less about what others think of us? Now, this can come from a lot of different places, and I feel like the origin is important here because that will lead us to what we can do to alleviate it or to better manage the urge, so to speak, okay? Number 1, and I think probably the most common that we don't realize, is if we didn't feel safe growing up. This could come from a lot of places. This could definitely be trauma related. This could also mean that our parents weren't consistent, right? Maybe we had an alcoholic or a drug addict in our home, and that meant that we weren't sure which parent we were going to get. Were they going to be nice and friendly or harmful and terrible? We didn't really know. And so that kind of unease or lack of consistent safety or reliability of our home growing up can lead us to feeling like we're always walking on eggshells, and our safety and security relies on the interactions or the behaviors of other people, right? So the way that we interact with them or the way that they're going to act towards us, that's the crux of our safety and security. Therefore, what is happening here is what is known as fawning. Now, if you haven't heard of our stress response is otherwise known as fight or flight. People talk about that a lot. Fight, flight. You either fight back or you run away. However, there are 2 other types of stress responses that are not as active, and that is freeze, which can often be associated with dissociation or playing dead, kind of playing possum. And the 4th, the other one, fawn. Now, fawning is when we extremely people please in a hopes that we will be safe and we won't get harmed again. I believe that's what could be happening here. Because we don't feel safe and secure, because we are pushed into our stress response, We don't know what else to do. We extreme people please. That's why it's important for everyone to like us, because we don't feel safe or secure unless they do. Now that's one piece. Another place that this could come from is what I struggle with, which is people pleasing. Not necessarily an extreme form, but a piece of it. I definitely like to be liked, and I don't like confrontation or conflict. I don't like to ruffle people's feathers, right? Boundaries are tricky. That's where this can come from as well. And then the other and the third piece, and then I'll get into what we can do, is kind of where like a low self-esteem component can be here as well. Now, obviously, self-esteem can be related to trauma. Hello, shame. It also, when we people please, that means we don't think so highly of ourselves, or we can't feel safe or relaxed until someone else feels safe or relaxed. That means we're looking outward, not inward. So you can see how it connects to all of these, but I feel like it's important on its own as well, that if we don't think very highly of ourselves, then a lot of our value, a lot of our worth comes from what other people think. Hence why it's really important for them to like us. Okay, now just to recap, right? Because there's kind of those three places that we thought it could come from. If we're wanting people to, if we feel like people need to like us, we want everyone to like us all the time. It could come from trauma and that inconsistency that we've had growing up, right? We don't really know what to do, so we fawn. It could come from, the second is kind of the urge to people please, right? Like because we don't really feel secure in who we are. We don't necessarily feel like alone we're enough. And a lot of our value and worth is wrapped up in that, which ties nicely into the third, which is the self-esteem, the lack of self-esteem. If we don't think very highly of ourselves, we aren't very confident, we're going to look outwards to others to reflect back what we're hoping to get, which is that we're good, that we're enough, and that other people love us or like us at the very least. Okay. So depending on where it's coming from, you can kind of see that the ways that we're going to manage it are going to be different. Now, if it is trauma based and we think it's coming out of that shame feeling, then what the work we're going to have to do is to work to process that trauma. That answer sucks, I know, but sometimes the best way out is through, almost always through. And so we have to heal from that. Maybe that means distancing ourselves from relationships that are continuing to cause this feeling in us, or maybe be more traumatizing or re-traumatizing. Maybe that means that we finally need to talk about the things that we're embarrassed of, we feel shame about, we feel guilty about. We need to work through that with a therapist, ideally, okay? And then in the people-pleasing piece, if we move into the second, which I struggle with the most, I believe that a lot of this has to do with sitting in the discomfort of not knowing if someone else is happy or not. And something that I know that's easier said than done, so just hang in here with me as I walk you through this. Something that I used to do that I try not to do anymore is I used to be able to like feel a room and notice like, oh, they're a little spine. Is something okay? Are you okay? And I'll ask a lot, like a check-in. Oh my God, are you feeling okay? What's happening? What's happening? I try to not do that anymore. And that doesn't mean I don't care. I have to change the way I think about it. It doesn't mean I don't care about the other person. It means that I don't need to put all of my energy into reading them. If they have something to say, they have to say it to me. Because otherwise, then I end up in these relationships where I'm always checking in on them, always making sure they're okay. And that can cause a situation, which I've been in before in a few friendships that I've had to end, where they never check in on me. It's always me checking in on them because I've created that dynamic in the relationship, right? I hold myself accountable. I've done that. I've created that dynamic and I've kept checking in and only asking them about them and not telling them about me. So I don't check in on people like in the way that I used to. It doesn't mean if someone's like crying, you can't say, how are you? I mean like subtleties that I'm picking up on, like the vibe. I don't have to do that. Also, noticing what comes up for me when I say no to things that I don't want to do. Or when I don't do those check-ins. I've been journaling a lot about how I feel. Where is that coming from? What's this sense of unease that I experience? And so part of people pleasing is finding ways to assuage your own anxiety, figuring out what purpose that urge to please others comes from, and what it means when you don't. Because for me, a lot of my self-worth is wrapped up in how other people perceive me. And I have to untangle that, and I have to be able to give my own self compliments and be kind and understanding without having it come from other people. Does that even make sense? I hope so. And also boundaries are key when it comes to stopping this people-pleasing thing, the saying no and the not being available. That's healing too. And then this third piece, and arguably what I would say is the largest, okay? If you heard nothing else, you're like, that doesn't relate to me. I don't know how to do that. This is too complicated. When we care a lot about what other people think, it usually means that we don't care enough about ourselves. And so we're looking out to other people to try to give us the self-esteem that we don't have inherently. And so in order to undo that, to untangle, to stop people pleasing, to stop fawning, to stop caring so much about what other people think, we're going to have to start building our self-esteem. And I know you're like, well, I don't know how to do that. That's really hard. Yeah, it is hard, but it's not impossible. There are two big ways that we can build our self-esteem. Number one, we can get really good at something. It's called building mastery. You've heard me talk about it before. It's a technique used in dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. And this means that we take something that we maybe kind of enjoy doing, or we've always wanted to learn. I've always wanted to know how to knit or ride a horse or play a guitar or anything. I don't even care. And as long as it's not harming anybody or yourself. And we get better at it. Maybe we take lessons. Maybe we watch some YouTube videos and we practice. We do that thing. And as we get better and better and better and better at it, we feel better and better about ourselves. So there's that piece of building mastery. Then the second is noticing self-talk. And I know you saw this coming, but the conversation that we have with ourselves is a powerful one. It's the conversation that, whether we realize it or not, is happening 24/7. And it's going to ooze out into other parts of our life, in our relationships, in our job at work or school or whatever we're involved in. It's going to happen to, we're going to find it there too, because it's happening within us all the time. And we want to make sure that that conversation is a kind one. So instead of toxic positivity in this, we can use bridge statements. We can do a lot of different things to kind of move the conversation into a more positive place. But the number one thing I would encourage you is, as you see these thoughts swirling, like, oh my God, they don't like me, I need to do this, I'm such a terrible person, I should never have said, distract, do something else, pull your brain out of that ever so comfortable spiral. Maybe we do a body shake, reset our nervous system, and we try to force a different thought. It's not going to work 100% of the time, but keep trying, it will get better, okay? So remember, if you are worrying too much about what other people think of you, maybe that means we need to work on past trauma, possibly, or inconsistencies growing up. We maybe need to heal from those relationships. Maybe that means we need to acknowledge our own like fawn response / people pleasing, how that ties in. And we probably need to work on building up our self-esteem. Okay? I hope that helps. Hang in there. It can and will get better. Now, moving on to question 2, it says, hey, Katie, how is it possible to stop emotional eating? Great question. I often see myself eating when stressed, for example, and for some reason, if I buy chocolate, I eat the whole thing in a day, which wouldn't mind me so much if it didn't mean that I have nothing for the next day, additionally to me feeling absolutely sick after. Okay. Someone else says, as an add-on, why do I eat to deal with emotions sometimes and avoid eating to deal with them at other times? We can talk about this. I don't understand why I use both of these as coping skills when they seem like the complete opposite. They're not, but we'll talk about that. I'm not sure how to stop until I understand how each are serving me. I hope this makes sense. Totally makes sense. Okay, now, emotional eating is interesting. And the reason that it feels so good and works so well is because our nervous system is wired for it. When we suck and swallow, it triggers our vagus nerve. It's very soothing to our nervous system. If you don't know, our vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve, I believe. It's the longest of them. And it's involved in all sorts of things, from our rest and relaxation sensation to heart rate and blood pressure and digestion. There's a shit ton of things it's involved in, pretty much everything in your body. And triggering it helps calm us down. Hence why children, babies, and like babies specifically, are soothed when they're fed. They're breastfed or bottle fed. They suck, they swallow, they look us in the eyes, and they can even get sleepy. They get calm. You can even, sometimes if you're feeding a baby, you can feel them literally go and like sink into you and relax. We are soothed through that. Therefore, eating is soothing to our system. So I'll put that out there because there's a lot of guilt and shame about it when it's how we're wired. But the question, how do we stop doing it then? Well, shit, my nervous system is like queued up. I need to be soothed. We have to find other ways. That's why vagus nerve stimulators, I'm actually trying out a new one right now, but I've had others that I've used in the past. Like I think Sensate was one of them. But vagus nerve stimulators can be helpful. There's also, I have a video, if you look up vagus nerve, Katie Morton, it should come up. I show you ways you can like massage, you can dunk your face in cold water. That diving reflex we have, that feeling triggers our vagus nerve. There's a lot of ways we can soothe our system. We can shake out. You guys hear me talk about things like this all the time, but that helps soothe our nervous system without us having to eat. And so the way that we stop emotionally eating isn't to shame ourselves, isn't to blame ourselves, isn't to say you shouldn't have that food in the house, because that doesn't help the problem. That just makes it harder to access, which I believe creates a scarcity mindset. And if you don't know what a scarcity mindset is, it's when we don't believe we can have something all the time or whenever we want it. And so when we do, we like overindulge in it, whether that be, chocolate, or could be a food item, could be something else. But if we don't think we can have it whenever, then we'll overdo it that one time that we do have access. And so I encourage you, keep those foods on hand. The foods are not the problem. It's the way that we're trying to manage our overwhelm. And so try out some other ways to soothe, but you're going to have to check in with yourself. If you're stressed, we need to maybe take a bath. Maybe we need to do a full body shake. Maybe we need to dunk our face in cold water. Maybe we need to get our vagus nerve stimulator out and put it on our neck and let it do its work. Whatever it is, we're going to need to find other ways, because unfortunately, eating is soothing, and that's what you're doing. And that's why, going on to the second component of this question, the person that says sometimes they overeat and sometimes they undereat, depending, that's because it's not about the food. It has nothing to do with the food. It has everything to do with our either urge to numb out or to soothe. Now, I would probably guess that when you're eating a lot, when you find yourself overeating or emotionally eating, it's probably because you feel maybe a little vulnerable or a little dysregulated. You need that soothing, almost like a mother would feed their child, okay? Now, the times when you don't eat, I would hypothesize that has more to do with a numb out from a different feeling. Like, I feel really rage-filled or upset about this. I don't know what to do. And instead of expressing it or journaling about it or shaking it out or any of those things, we don't eat. And it's a way to distract ourselves from those experiences, because we're thinking all about the fact that we're so hungry. And it's just using food in these ways is just our way of coping with an experience that we wish we weren't having, something that's uncomfortable. I talk all the time, how important it is for us to feel our feelings. And yes, it is, because it helps us process and move through them versus being held captive by them. But that doesn't mean that feeling our feelings is comfortable. It's really fucking uncomfortable. And sometimes we just don't feel like we can, or we don't know how. And so we're using food to cope. And so that's why it doesn't really matter. We can undereat, overeat. Sure, eating itself is soothing to our system, but I would just assume that you're toggling between avoiding eating and overeating depending on what you're needing at the time. Are we wanting to soothe? Are we wanting to numb out completely? But I could be wrong. That's just my hypothesis. So let me know if there's something different. But that's the purpose that it serves for most people. If you think I missed something, leave it in the comments and we'll talk about it more. Moving on to question number 3. This question says, hey, Katie, can you talk about somatic responses to stress and anxiety? How does one manage this? Okay, now there's a comment on a couple add-ons, but we'll get into those later. So I just want to address this first. Now, have you ever had all of a sudden you get the chills? Whew, or you just feel like you need to move your leg or kick it out or something. I know some people have restless leg syndrome. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about kind of those little ticks, little jerks we can feel. Those are often signs that our body needs to move something through it. That's an automatic somatic release. And I think it's really fascinating to learn that when I just feel like I need to move. Do you ever feel that? I sit a lot for work, unfortunately, and I'll feel like I need to just stretch, or I need to stand up, or I need to do this. That's my body's way of saying, hey, we're feeling a little locked up here. We need to move this through. And the ticks in particular, those shivers we can get, is a good indication that we need to do some movement to help move through our stress or anxiety that we're experiencing. Okay, just throwing that out there. It's a good little red flag. So put that in your brain and help that remind you that maybe I should get up and shake out, or maybe I should do some of the things that help soothe my system. Now, when we're feeling stressed or anxious, that means that we are in our stress response, that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And especially when we go into the freeze or the fawn, which are not movement related, these are stagnant types of our stress response. When we find ourselves in those, that's where this is going to benefit us the most. So if you find yourself dissociating a lot or feeling like extreme people pleasing a lot, we're going to want to have some somatic ways to deal with this. Now, somatic responses, I'm not sure if this person's looking for tools, but that's what I'm going to offer is, even just starting with hand massages. If you feel comfortable when you're in the shower, put your hand under the water and pay attention to how it feels as it hits your fingertips and all the way up to your wrist and your elbow, right? Do your other hand, do your feet, things that feel okay. Just drawing yourself into your body. That's why I love yoga personally. It's been really healing for me because it forces me into my body versus pushing me out, which is kind of that urge to numb out and shut down that we all feel from time to time. And so body shakes, cold water on the face, water in the shower on our arms, those are all ways to bring ourselves back into our bodies. And then when we want releases, that's like why we do the shaking and the walking and the moving. Even just repetitive kind of stimming movement can be really healing and helpful in that case. All with the goal of getting that nervous or anxious or stressed out energy that's coursing through us, giving it a place to go. If we just freeze and don't move at all, it only builds up and feels worse. Now, hopefully that helps because that sounds, I think I answered your like how to manage this. Now there was comments on this says yes. And also, could dissociation be considered a somatic response as well? No, it's actually the opposite because that's frozen. When we're dissociating, we would need a somatic release to get us out of that, essentially, to stop that from happening. Not necessarily to get us out of it. That would be more of like a grounding technique. So sorry about that confusion. This person says, people usually talk about grounding by counting objects in the room or washing your face with cold water. But when it's something heavier that lasts for days or weeks, that's just not enough. If we find ourselves dissociating, it's lasting for long periods of time. The goal, obviously, we want to pull ourselves out. But if it's that deep and that heavy, I find that we often need to, instead of trying when we're already there, the goal is to figure out the signs and symptoms of it earlier on so we can do stuff before we're fully pulled out. Because I've had patients like this too, where they can remain dissociated for like days at a time. And some even feel like maybe they were dissociated through most of their childhood, so they don't remember any of it. So I believe it can go on for long periods of time. But we can definitely like do all the things like cold water. I think an ice plunge would be amazing for any of you. You don't have to have like one of those fancy tubs. You can just put cold water in your bathtub and get in it. I know it's uncomfortable. That's the point, is that it pulls you out. If you live in a cold climate and you have snowbanks, jump into a snowbank. Just have shorts and t-shirt on, get in quick, get in out. In and out. I don't want you getting any frostbite, get back in your house. But I mean, I want that cold, that shock to your system, a cold shower even. Is it uncomfortable? Yes. And yes, that's the point. But that can help pull you out. But what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to understand ourselves a little bit more earlier on so that we sense some of the dissociative symptoms before it's happening. Meaning, dissociation, if you don't know, is our brain's way of pulling the ripcord on reality. It can remove us from self, it can remove us from environment, all with the goal of keeping us sane and alive. Amazing. It's such a great tool. It's really helpful. It gives us a little bit of distance between the painful or overwhelming thing that's happening. However, it's not always so comfortable and we can find ourselves stuck in it. And so what we want to understand is why we're dissociating. Meaning, is dissociation in my life happening because I feel super stressed out about work? Is it when I hear loud voices or someone shouts at me? Is it the buildup of all of these things? There's a lot of different things. I don't want to tell you it can only be certain things. It can come from all sorts of places, but we need to get better at understanding those triggers so that before it really happens, we can do some things to mitigate it, like doing a body shake in the cold water and all that stuff. That's really how we manage it. But dissociation itself is not a somatic response. It is essentially a freeze response. Now, the add-on says, another one, is the somatic response different according to which anxiety disorder one has? Not necessarily. And if yes, what if someone has more than one? Wait, is it even possible to have a second anxiety disorder like social anxiety or OCD if one already has generalized anxiety disorder? Yes, you can have more than one anxiety disorder because general means you have uncontrollable worry, and you could have that as well as have a specific social phobia. Like you worry about being out and people not liking you, you embarrassing yourself in front of them, all that stuff. So you can have both. You can meet the criteria for both. So yes. And then the question of, is the somatic response different according to which anxiety disorder? No. It's all about the alleviation of the overwhelm within our nervous system. So don't feel like it's specific to what diagnoses you have. I think it's more specific to person. Just depends on what works best for you. Okay? Now let's move on to question number 4. This question says, hey, Katie, I have been made homeless because my relationship is broken down. So I'm currently on the streets and charging my phone at McDonald's. The reason my relationship is broken down is because of my trauma. I've had it all. childhood sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, a narcissistic parent, and a drug addict parent. Emotional abuse, gained an eating disorder as a child from my mom. I can't be around so many things without being triggered into flashbacks. I can't have sex because of trauma. I'm too scared of men. I still struggle with eating and I self-harm. I've been trying so hard working with my therapist, but recovery seems impossible, and I'm wondering if it will ever get better. Will I ever recover? The short answer is yes. We need to get you some extra support. I don't know where you're located, but I'm assuming your therapist is helping you, but you also could benefit from a social worker and potentially like an occupational therapist. We need to get you someone who can help get you environmental support, right? For those of you who don't know, there's a difference between a licensed clinical social worker and an LMFT, a licensed marriage and family therapist like myself. Us LMFTs focus on relationships, relationship building, relationship with self, relationship with others. Social workers primarily, with it, like the reason that they were created was to help with a relationship with environment, meaning to making sure that you have all the resources that you need. It's connecting you with a shelter, with maybe some low-cost housing, helping make sure that you have transportation to and from your medical appointments, all of that stuff to help you essentially feel better, do better. Now, yes, social workers can also offer therapy, but a big piece of it is making sure that we have all of that extra environmental support. So we need to make sure that we get you someone like that to help you gain, or I guess have access to a home, to have access to support and the basic needs that you have as a human, just like me, right? We all have these needs, and I want to find a way for you to get those met. And so my goal for you would honestly, instead of feeling like, oh, I have to move through this trauma and I have to process this, yes, that will be part of your recovery. However, right now, I really want you to focus on the basic needs. You need to make sure you can sleep. When we're homeless, I'd assume sleep is very difficult to come by because it's not safe. I do know through research, this is total random fact, we know that when we sleep in hotels or places that aren't our own home, that we don't sleep as well, that like half of our brain stays awake. I forget the system they call it, but it's essentially like our alert system because we don't quite feel secure there. And so part of our brain stays kind of awake so that if something happens, someone tries to break in, if someone tries to get into our hotel room, we can wake up easy and get ourselves out of there. It's protective. I'd assume being homeless is no different, that we can't fully rest because we don't feel safe or secure, so we can't get into that deep sleep. I want to make sure that you're able to get those needs met. So let's focus on, maybe ask your therapist if there's a social worker you could be connected with, or if there's an occupational therapist or someone in your area that can help get things back together for you so that you can feel safe and okay and you have a stable home. Because not to get into too like nitty gritty of old psych theories, but there's this, if you haven't heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's essentially the belief that like we can't work up into, the top of the hierarchy is like enlightenment or self-actualization. But the basic stuff is like air, food, shelter, like we need to have those things first. And I really want you to focus on that because we're not gonna be able to do this trauma work until you feel okay in your environment. I know that's a shitty answer, but yes, you will recover. We just need to get you to a place where you have a safe home. Everyone deserves to have a safe home. So let's get you into a place where you can have access to that, whether it's through a shelter, whether it's through some low-cost housing in your area. Maybe you have a good friend you can move in with for a short period of time. I don't know if you have a job, but we could try to work towards that. There's a great organization I used to work with in LA, in Santa Monica specifically, called the OPCC. And they, sorry, something tickling my nose. And they help people get jobs. So they help get you clothing so that you look presentable, help you shower and get all cleaned up so that you can be presentable for your interview. They print resumes for you. They help prepare you for the interview, and all with the goal of getting you a job. And then you can live there for a period of time while you have that job and save up money. And then they try to place you into proper housing. So ask your therapist for more resources and let's get you more support so you can feel better. Okay. Moving on to question number 5, it says, Kati, how do you deal with an invisible illness, especially when I'm the invisible child in my family? I'm 40. I have dysautonomia after COVID and pneumonia, tachycardia, POTS, extreme fatigue, heat intolerance, shortness of breath, muscle deterioration, brain fog, costochondritis, costochondritis, I'm probably saying that wrong, among other things. It's been 2.5 years of absolute hell. My family sees me breathing and standing and quote unquote, I'm not dead. So I must be making it all up or exaggerating. I'm told constantly to just calm down and that it's just anxiety. I've been invisible and unheard in my family my whole life. As the youngest child, I'm never taken seriously. Silenced if I offer an opinion, shut down if I offer to help. My family has no compassion for others, always victim blaming. And unfortunately, these have been my caretakers, which I'm grateful for, but their lack of empathy comes off as cruel. I totally understand. Okay, somebody else has an add-on to this, but let's dig into this piece first. How do we deal with an invisible illness? Now, there are a couple pieces here, and I read in the comments, and there's people are going to give a little pushback on this, but just hang with me, okay? Now, the first piece is that if we have an invisible illness, something that other people may not realize, like for example, a good friend of mine actually has a lot of the same things that you're struggling with due to her long COVID, and that she looks like she's fine, but she's not. And she has to, it's like the spoons where like, how many spoons do you have every day? She essentially has to bargain, like what things is she going to do today or right now? And then what things won't she be able to do later, right? It's always like you're paying for it. And so, but she doesn't look sick, but she is. Now, in this case, because I do have a friend who has a lot of the same things that you have, like the tachycardia, extreme fatigue, the heat intolerance, all that stuff, it was helpful for me as a friend for her to tell me about it, to be educated. Now, I know in your case, it sounds like your family knows this, but I'm just saying this for anybody out there who has an invisible illness and feels like it's not taken seriously. Please give people in your life an opportunity to understand. Now, it's not, and this is where I know there's going to be pushback, so just hear me out. It is not your responsibility to ensure that they learn and that they offer empathy. We can't control other people, and you shouldn't exhaust yourself trying to educate them, but at least give them an opportunity to educate themselves. Like if my friend hadn't told me about the stuff she's struggling with, then I wouldn't know. And then I wouldn't understand like the irregularity in her availability and the canceling of plans and stuff like that. I wouldn't get it because I wasn't given the opportunity to. Okay. So give people an opportunity to meet you where you're at. Now, when it comes to our families and people who insist on not seeing us, not listening to us, not educating themselves, unfortunately, we can't force them. We don't have control over other people. And if it's really harmful to our mental health and making us feel worse day after day after day, then we might not want to spend that much time with those people. I'm not saying you have to cut your family off. That's pretty intense. I know that comes with its own pain and baggage. However, nobody says that you have to spend a ton of time with them, especially if they're shit talking you and victim blaming and saying you're exaggerating, blah, 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 right? We don't have to spend that much time around them. I encourage you to spend time around people who do want to learn, who do want to support, and who just believe you because they know you. You don't have anything to prove. Just give them, if you give people an opportunity to educate themselves and they do, those are your people. Okay? Now, I do believe that, spending too much time around people who don't believe you and who question and say, well, you're not dead, blah, 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 like make comments like that. I believe that like erodes at our own self-worth, our own self-esteem, and even maybe in our own belief about our situation. We might have some shame and guilt and embarrassment about our illnesses that we have zero control over. And so if you're not in therapy, I'd encourage you to get into therapy. If there's a support group in your area or online, for people especially with long COVID, I know that there are some of those, so maybe look into them. But just having other people who get it can be really healing, limiting the amount of time we spend with people who are not trying to understand and, making sure that we aren't taking what they say to heart. And that's why we have to limit our encounters. Now, there was a comment on this. It said, my question is similar to yours. I can't play sports anymore, which was like half of my life, and school was my other half. And I love both so much, but now I'm just home all day. How can I cope with losing these big parts of my life and with the feeling of meaninglessness when nothing I feel productive or matter at all anymore? Every day is kind of the same. I'm just surviving. I have things I like doing, but that will never make up for the loss of everything I'm missing in life. Thank you so much for your podcast, Katie. It makes me have something to look forward to. Of course. So happy to help. And I do realize, so we'll get into that question, but at the very end of that first part of the question, they said, unfortunately, these have been my caretakers, which I'm grateful for, but their lack of empathy comes off as cruel. If there's any way for us to I don't know if we have other options for caretakers or if we have other people who can come in to take care of us and to assist. But I really, as much as possible, it's just shitty when you feel kind of frozen or stuck there. I might look into, I know, and again, this could take a lot of brain space and take your time with it, but we might want to look into what other access to care we have. Like if there are, people that will come and pick you up and take you to appointments so you don't have to have your family do it, because it's just like having them there is just not helpful. Or like if there are other groups, support groups and things you can become a part of. I think those are all really helpful in healing. And as much as we can, we want to have other supports outside of them. Like even our community online. If we can't get out of the house and we can't minimize the amount of time we spend around them, we can at least have support when we need it through the amazing communities that exist online. And that means that you don't have to be taken anywhere. You don't have to use your energy getting to a place, and you can get support that way. So maybe that's another possibility there too. Now, the person who's talking about how you lost these big parts of your life, whenever we we're diagnosed or we contract an illness that is chronic or at least long lasting within some form, there's going to be this big piece of grieving. And I encourage you to journal about it, to cry about it, to let yourself feel it, the loss. We can't just pretend that everything's okay and, at least we're alive or whatever we've told ourselves. It's okay to be sad and to be mad and to grieve it like the loss of anything. Give yourself that opportunity. However, I will challenge you that we can let ourselves grieve, and you don't have to rush that process. But I also want you to find some things that you can do now. I know you used to love playing sports and you love school. Are there other things we can learn to do? Maybe you take up crocheting. Maybe you decided that you like the paint by numbers or color by numbers. Or I have a friend who does like the jewels that they glue in. I forget what she calls it. Can we do some of that? I know those things are not the same as what you used to do. That's kind of the point. We're going to have to find other things that we're meeting us where we're at. Like I used to love playing sports as a kid too, but even as an adult, I don't have the time or sometimes the energy to do it. So what else can I do? I have to fill my life with other things that are enjoyable. Are there short books that you enjoy reading that you feel like you can manage a chapter at a time because they're nice short chapters? I don't know. Let's try to find some other things that can bring us some sense of fulfillment, some sense of enjoyment. Maybe since we love sports so much, could we manage a team in some way? I don't know, again, your capabilities. I'm just throwing things out there that there are more ways to be involved in sports rather than just play them. I don't know if you're into stats. I don't know how much brain space that takes from you. I don't know how bad your brain fog is if you have it, but I'm just saying there's other things that we can do, other ways that we can find fulfillment in our life. And unfortunately, as we grow and change and things happen, we have to pivot, we have to adapt. And I really want you to try to find some things that bring you fulfillment and joy, just like those old things used to. Okay. So think outside the box, get creative. It does get better. Final question is question number 6. Says, I'm divorced 4 years after a 30-year marriage. And now that I'm past the anger and resentment of betrayal, we get along, which feels better in my body and is easier on our grown kids and a few mutual friends. It was a confusing relationship and even more confusing of a breakup, but I feel like I'm on solid ground now, except that I cannot seem to connect with anyone on a romantic level. I see friends all around me, meeting, dating, connecting, falling in love, and I feel like a mere spectator. I'm at peace, but lonely, and I feel stuck. My career has faltered as well. I don't know how to get out of my comfort zone. I need to, however, my job depends on it. I'm in sales, and I don't want to be alone for the rest of my life. How does one become unstuck? So this is a great question. And I'm so glad that you're feeling, you've moved past the anger, the resentment, and you get along enough, which is good for the fact that you have children together. Even though they're grown, it means you can get together and it's not horrible. And that is wonderful. Something has happened inside of you that's bigger than that relationship. I don't know, because you said betrayal. So was there cheating? Is there some kind of internal dialogue you're having about what happened in your marriage? Is there some kind of belief about who you are or what your self-worth is? Or did your self-esteem take a hit? Something happened in there. There's some belief that we have. There's something shook us to our core. And it might even be, I'd even hypothesize, because as a therapist, I always want to look at this. It might even connect to old patterns, things from childhood, other relationships we've had. I want maybe take some time and journal about this. Like what would it look like for you to date, to fall in love, to connect with someone, to have sex with someone else? What would that look like? What would that feel like to you? What kind of beliefs do you have about that? We need to figure this out because you actually have all the answers. You know how to get yourself unstuck. But we're stuck. I find when people say they're stuck, I always think freeze. I always think, oh, we're in our stress response. We're just not in fight, because you said you're past the anger. You're not in fight and you're not in flight. You're in freeze. And that stuckness or that freezeness is protective. So what are we protecting ourselves from? You might think, I don't know if I can go through another divorce. Okay. No one said you have to get married. So what would it look like to date? I don't know if I can fall in love again because that would wound me too much. Okay. Why would it wound you too much? Because of this thing that happened. Well, how could we ensure a relationship is different? How could we take our time? What are the things we can learn from our past relationship and maybe the red flags we overlooked early on and just didn't realize they were there? Right? There's a lot we can learn from a past relationship gone wrong so that we are more informed as we move forward. That doesn't mean we have to jump into the dating pool. And I'm not here to tell you that anybody needs to date, but you said you're lonely and you need to get out of your comfort zone. So why are we frozen in our comfort zone? There's something in there. There's other fears that have come up for you as a result of this, and has nothing to do with your ex-husband, I assume, anymore. It has to do with you. So what movements or what changes do we need to make? What do we need to process maybe? Do we need to get in therapy maybe to figure out why this is holding us stuck? And it's also making your career falter. So we want to get this going. So I encourage you to start journaling about this. And like I said, journaling does not need to make sense. It doesn't have to be a cohesive statement. It doesn't have to tell a story. It can be jumping all over the place. It can be misspelled, hard to read. Doesn't matter. Get it out of your head. Let's see what we come up with, because you have all those answers. And having a therapist can ensure that they're asking the tough questions and kind of challenging you to think more deeply about this. But that will help you get unstuck. I also think there could be some benefit from you doing some of those kind of like grounding techniques, things like shaking out, taking a cold shower, doing some deep breathing, looking around making sure that we're not in dissociation. Because sometimes we can be dissociated and almost not realize it, which I know sounds wild, but it can happen that way. So just taking care of yourself, tapping in, because we've moved past this one relationship, but we really haven't let it go. And I'm curious what parts you're holding on to. What are you telling yourself about that? Because that's what's holding you here. Okay? Hang in there. You'll get unstuck. We just have to challenge ourselves to figure out where this is coming from. Okay. Thank you all so much for listening and watching. Thank you for sending in your questions. Thank you for all of your support and for sharing this podcast with others. It really, really does help. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Do your homework, and I'll see you next time.